I told my mom at one point, I feel like my first cancer, which attacked my back, was like World War One. My second cancer, which attacked my knees, was like World War Two. And this one's a human rights violation.
Into one person's story of change to reveal a little bit about how and why we make big changes in our lives and what can be learned from these experiences. I'm your host, Kelley Styring, founder and principal researcher from InsightFarm, a consultancy that helps companies learn from their customers and consumers through deep conversation and connection, often told as stories like the one you'll hear on The Connection, often told as stories like the one you'll hear on this podcast. So let's get the conversation started. Some of our subjects would like to be named. Others would like to remain anonymous. Today, we'll hear from someone who'd like to be known as Wonder Woman. Why? This will be clear very soon. And by the end of this story, I think you'll agree this name is a good description.
I used to play, such a dork. I used to play the Wonder Woman theme song from the 70s in her satin tights, fighting for our rights. I thought it was the funniest line. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go save the world, I I thought it was the funniest line. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go save the world. I also was a volunteer at a cancer camp, which I grew up going to, and my name at camp was Wonder Woman. So that was part of the reason for having that to be my theme song. The chapter of my life right now.
Focus on is your survivor story. I don't know if that's how you think about it, though. Do you think about that part of your life in that way?
So if we're talking about my cancer history, I really think of that mostly as my childhood. That's what it was. And one thing my mom, I'm going to get choked. I'm going to get choked up throughout this, so just bear with me.
Absolutely. We have all
One
the
thing
time
that
you
my
need.
mom always said to me as a kid with cancer, whenever I would get down or say things like it's not fair, she would always say, you never know what the next person is going through. You never know what the next person is going through. Whew. And I didn't realize how true that was until I was older. And I, so to tell a little about my cancer history, I was first diagnosed when I was 8 years old. My dad was a gymnast. I was in both. We were also Mormon, and we went to church every Sunday, quite religiously, no pun intended. When I was diagnosed, I couldn't go to church because everyone brought their sick kids to church, and I couldn't be around all of the, common illnesses because my immune system was dead. So stopped going to church, couldn't dance anymore. The cancer had eaten away at 9 vertebrae in my spine. So I had 9 compression fractures in my spine from the cancer. I was in a back brace and a wheelchair. So I couldn't dance, gymnastics. And so, yeah, that was probably my first big change in life.
How old were you at that time?
The first time I was 8. And then I got into remission and I was coming off chemo. We had an off chemo party. I was, I think 10 and a half, 10 years old. My mom sewed this beautiful dress for me. They were going to take me out to dinner to celebrate. But it wasn't just dinner. We actually went to my elementary school and the whole neighborhood was there. Not only that, kid's musician was there, and he walked up and I was like all shy because I had a big crush on him at the time, probably my first celebrity crush. And then 2 years or a year and a half later, my knees started hurting me. I would hyperextend my knees and fall down in agony. I was relapsing. Took a while to convince the doctors that I had relapsing. I think my doctor just wasn't ready to admit it. He was like, no, she's supposed to be cured. She's fine. Took a while to get people to listen to us and do the right tests. And the second time it didn't really show up in my blood work. My white count was still up, and they didn't find it until they did some bone scans and bone marrow aspirations to test. That was a huge change because I was 12, and when you're a 12-year-old girl, you're trying to be pretty and fit in, and you're right at groups and whatever. So that was a big change. I also had a tube in my chest called a double lumen Hickman line at the time. I had that clear up till I was 16. So gym class in junior high was a hell of a lot of fun. I actually had two good friends that were in my class, and they would stand on either side of me while I changed so nobody could see my tube.
Those are some good friends.
Yeah,
Those are
absolutely.
some good friends. How did your parents, or did your parents, how were you told the first time? Do you remember much about when you were 8?
The first time I was in my hospital bed, the first time I was in my hospital bed, I was really sick the first time because it took us a long time to figure out what was wrong with me. I was my mom's crazy kid and I was lethargic all summer. And she was like, something's wrong with my child. My back hurt all the time. And we would go over a speed bump in my mom's minivan, and just the bounce of the speed bump would cause me to um, get the wind knocked out of me. So Mom, don't go over the speed bump too fast. I'd brace myself or lay flat on the minivan seat as flat as I could. So, I got the hiccups one time. It knocked the wind out of me. I fell to the ground, and then my dad, he was trying to cheer me up, and I told him, don't make me laugh. It'll hurt more. So that's that were the that those were the indicators of the first diagnosis. The second time it was in my knees, and I knew immediately that I I've tried to explain, it's always affected my joints, and I've tried to explain the feeling of it, but it comes from the middle of the bone basically for me. It's different for everybody. But if you've ever hit your funny bone real hard, or hit the tips of your finger real hard and kind of resonates through your bones for a second or five, this is like a constant resonance like that, and it doesn't go away, and it's nauseating. When it when it really hurts because of a jolt or something, it really does just knock you over. So that was my experience the first two times. Remission after the second time, and I was doing great. I was 9 years in remission, and I just entered UW at Tacoma, and I already had my associate's degree. I was ready to, finish my bachelor's and go out and save the world. I was doing scuba diving. I was dating this guy that I was pretty sure I was going to marry, and all these things, is the beginning of, that young life. And I was supposed to go on a semester at sea through UW Tacoma. It was good. It was going to be the very first semester at sea. I was all enrolled. Everything was paid for. I'd paid it off before it even happened. And I walked up to the professor, and it was a female professor, and I handed her a withdrawal slip. And she was shocked. She looked at me, she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, that something isn't right. My wrist had swollen up to this, but it was like a hard swell. And I didn't know what was wrong, but it hurt and it ached, and it had that ringing sensation that I knew was a relapse. So I argued with doctors over a year, actually almost exactly a year, when I first went to the doctor and said, I know I'm relapsing. And I was told that I was being paranoid, and I was told that, there's no possible way. You're 9 years in remission. There's no way you're relapsing, all this. And so I ignored it. I was so buff at the time, in such good shape. I could lift an air tank over each shoulder and march down to the beach in my scuba gear. And I very well could have snapped my wrist, and they would have had to amputate my arm.
And so why did you ignore it? Because it sounds like you knew.
I ignored it because everybody else told me to.
Sounds like you knew.
I ignored it because everybody else told me to, basically. There was so much negative, and I was only 21. When you're 21, you don't have all the gumption that you might when you're in your 30s or 40s. And I was pretty bold even at 21. Doubt yourself, and you stop listening to what's right for you. So, especially at 21.
Right. And so this is your third round.
This is my third diagnosis, second relapse. And I finally got it diagnosed after fighting with people for a while. There was one point I was sent to get a bone scan, and they squirt like glow in the dark bone stuff into your veins, and so they can see everything. And they wanted to just scan my wrist, but they had already done a bone marrow aspiration on my wrist and a regular bone marrow aspiration through my back of the hip. They signed in on my wrist and a regular bone marrow aspiration through my back of the hip. They signed me up for this bone scan, and the lady doing the bone scan says, "Oh no, we're just doing your wrist today." I was like, "Hey, no, we already know it's in my wrist. The reason for the bone scan is to make sure that it's not anywhere else in my body." So luckily this time it was localized. It was localized to the wrist, and it was considered a possibly a secondary cancer, and they diagnosed it as a lymphoma. So being that it was not a full-blown leukemia but rather a lymphoma, I've always considered it a secondary cancer, probably from previous cancer treatments. So we went through a lot of like, how do we treat this kind of questions, and like wanted to do a full bone marrow transplant. And I was like, no, you can, you know, treat me, but I'm not, I knew that I would die if I had a bone marrow transplant.
What about that situation? I'm wondering about your relationship with doctors and with the system at this point. Having been through this a while, what do you think it was that made you so assertive in your care?
So I had told everyone after probably when I was about again, but I did. I was lucky that at the time I was still on my dad's insurance, thank God, because he had really good insurance. We talked to the insurance and they allowed me to go back to my pediatric oncologist who had treated me the first 2 times. And he worked out a specialized protocol. It was the first time I had radiation. It was very localized. First time I had radiation, it was very localized just to my wrist. And we did a very light dose chemo. There's certain chemo drugs that you can only have a certain amount of before it starts shutting down internal organs and, you know, other parts of your body. And I was like, I'm not going to go through that. I'm not going to have my family watch me go through that.
Well, you're speaking up for yourself in ways that, so on the one hand, as a 21-year-old, you're saying, well, I didn't have the gumption that I have now. But I think you showed a lot of gumption
I,
in participating in your treatment.
Once it was diagnosed, yes. But like I said, I did ignore it for a year. Because everybody was like, there's no way, you know. I hated being told that I was paranoid.
Do you think part of you wanted to not be sick?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it could be arthritis. It could be, you know, so
Mhm.
many other things, so
Mhm.
many other things. So yeah, part of me definitely, but deep down I knew right away as soon as I felt it. But yeah, it took quite a while to convince others to do what I needed.
So let's go back to the first time. So you were
Okay.
sick in the hospital.
Hmm.
How did it approach you as a child to even tell you what this was or what the implications?
I was really sick when they finally got me to the hospital. I think I mentioned it. It had been summertime and I was pretty lethargic. And my mom took my younger sister in for, I think, an ear infection. And I was with them and she convinced the doctor to do just a blood test. She thought she might be anemic. She's like the tiredest kid I know, and she's usually my most active kid. They do a blood test, and not even a couple hours later, the doctor called and said, "Meet me at the hospital." They did a, my mom is really good at telling this story. It's very dramatic though. I was in the hospital and they went to do a bone marrow aspiration because my blood count was so low. But it wasn't a hospital that was used to doing children's bone marrow aspirations. And they used an adult needle on an 8-year-old child. And I am not like a screamer. I'm not normally afraid of needles or anything, but I was screaming through this procedure. At first, both my parents were holding my hands, and then my mom had to excuse herself. And she's right on the floor of the hospital because she knew she was going to pass out. And she was like sweating, and the floor was cold. And she said she just laid there. And then a nurse came and made her sit on a bench.
Well, wait a second. You're in a hospital. There should be people to take care of you. At that point, had anyone said the word cancer to you? Did you?
Yeah, so my paternal grandmother had passed away from melanoma. So I knew that grandma had died of cancer. And when my mom came in after that bone marrow test and told me that I had cancer, my first question was, am I going to die like grandma? And she said, no, they have really good die like grandma. And she said, no, they have really good treatments for kids. And I'm sure she was just beside herself trying to explain this to me, but I was lucky. I had one of the best pediatric oncologists you could ever imagine, and oncologists you could ever imagine. And in fact, I think he even follows me on Facebook now. Like, he's just a great guy, and I wouldn't be here without him.
What
Without
what do you think that relationship did it change your relationship with your parents? With your parents at that point? I mean, you were 8, so I don't know what you can remember from that.
I think so. I would say yes. My mom and I was her tough kid. I wasn't, my brother was really easy before me. I was a lot more small to the other, and there was nothing she could do about it. I think we learned to appreciate each other. And one of the things she told me later was that, and I don't think she meant this like in any way other than knowing that I was of strong character, that it was of strong character, that it was probably best that it was me than any of her other 3 kids, because she knew that I would fight it.
I'm sure she meant that in the most loving way.
Yeah.
Because that's a very, I mean, that's a very tough thing to actually admit to another person. Admit to another person.
Yeah. Or have a thought of as a parent. But I understand now how she meant it. And, I understand her thinking process on that. So
Yeah.
I'm not mad at her about it.
Well, no, I mean, she's showing you her vulnerability in a way that if you had. So did you feel fear, or did you feel comforted when you were told, that there were great options for kids at that time? Did you
There
still feel
was,
fear?
yeah, there was always fear. There was always fear. And a lot of it, I mean, my family's really comedic as well. Comedic as well. So anytime things did get like stupid or scary or just downright rough, there were always jokes flying around, really bad jokes, but there were always jokes flying around. And to this day, my dad and I like, wait a minute. Is that okay to say? Or they'll even look at us like, wait, she's your daughter? How are you talking to each other this way? And that's just me and my dad. I don't, I know that like my other siblings joke with him, but I don't think on the same like gritty level that him, but I don't think on the same like gritty level that he and I do. But he was also the one that would stay with me in the hospital so that my mom could be home with the other kids. So he saw me through a different side of it than my mom did. And after that first bone marrow aspiration, he was always the one that held my hand for bone marrows and spinal taps and all those things. We played a joke on my youngest sister once. So when I went bald the second time, my brother shaved his head, my dad shaved his head, my dad shaved his head. My youngest sister was a little bit of a hellion, but only when mom wasn't around. So she'd like scream at us. And so we one day just out of the blue told her that the reason we were all bald was because we were aliens and we'd been away from the mothership too long. And the only way that we were going to survive is that if we ate her at some point. This is terrible, right? So we went on with this.
It's hilarious.
Probably a good year or so. She was like 4 or 5. And it came to a head and we stopped telling her this. And we like admitted that it was all just a big story. In the hallway, hey girls, it's dinner time, bring Elise. And she ran and locked herself behind two different doors she locked. And we had to coax her out. We were like, it's a joke. We're never going to eat you. Like, you know,
So trauma.
you know,
So trauma. So,
yeah. So
but it
like,
sounds like such a loving family,
really it was. We
to
we
come
actually
together
never
in that
told my
way.
parents that story until we were having like a big family dinner, and my youngest sister brought it up, I think probably at Thanksgiving. That And so we had told my parents the whole drawn out story, and they were like, "What?" Terrible.
Do you think that coming through this experience changed you in ways regarding risk? Do you think you take more risk or fewer risks?
It's definitely made me take fewer risks. Coming out of my bachelor's program, I had the opportunity to go to Africa, but I was also just coming off chemo. And part of the program was to work with AIDS children. Compromised immune system and not quite sure, ended up not doing it. And human rights work was really all I wanted to do. I ended up staying in the States and ended up getting married when I probably shouldn't have.
Well, it's a different kind of risk
It's
altogether.
definitely a different kind of risk. I see that now.
What about how do you think of time? How do you think of time? Do you think I've survived this, so I have all the time in the world, or do you think I have a limited amount of time I need to get a bunch of stuff done?
No, for a while, I had the limited amount of time attitude. Definitely through college and my first career job. My first career job right after my bachelor's degree, I got a master's degree. It took a year and a half for me to complete, and then I got my first career job, and then got married, and did all those things, and I was in a rush to do it. In a way, moved to the deep south, followed the guy I married to the deep south, and did that whole experience. That was a quite a change. I met so many great people, and that experience is eye-opening in so many ways. I was somewhat prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for I was somewhat prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for all of it, for sure.
How do you feel now in terms of, do you feel like you're aggressively pursuing life, or do you think you're kind of going with the flow? How
I
do you
think for
feel?
a while there, after my divorce, after moving back here, I was definitely going with a nonprofit, and I was doing bone marrow recruitment, and my focus was largely minorities. So I feel like I got a lot done. I was really proud of the work that I did down there, and then laid off right after 2009. I went with the flow, but almost in like a angry way. And there were things to be angry about.
How do you feel about medical care now? So, for example, do you go for regular checkups? Do you go for cancer screenings? Are you kind of your own boss when it comes to that?
I don't go to the doctor unless something is absolutely wrong. First of all, I don't think they're going to listen to me anyways. Absolutely wrong. First of all, I don't think they're going to listen to me anyways. I haven't had a primary care physician since maybe 2014, when I left my health insurance provided job. And I have had insurance. I had since my new position started, and I still have not found myself a primary care physician. I
Okay.
need to. I just turned 41, and the last time I did go to the doctor, funny story, do you want to hear it?
Sure. Yeah.
I was mushroom foraging. I was mushroom foraging with some girlfriends, and we interrupted some kind of hive of some type. And I was the only one that got bit or stung or whatever it was, but it got me on my side butt. I was in pain, and I gave it a few days, and it was just really the side butt one was really swollen red. So I finally make an appointment for this walk-in clinic, and I go in, and of course the doctor that I see is like this gorgeous salt and pepper hair man that just like screams sex appeal. And I'm like, great, I have to show this guy my ass. He gives me this whole position. We have no like history of your health and all this. And part of the reason he brought that up, and I think when I do find a primary care physician, I'm not going to put all my health history on the initial paperwork because every time I see a new doctor, they freak out and they don't listen to what I'm saying in the moment. They want to concentrate on my 8-year-old, my 12-year-old, and my 21-year-old self. And that's not what I'm there for. So I
I
think,
can appreciate that. So they are looking for much bigger problems than what you're describing.
yeah.
That's
And
ironic given that you
yeah.
that's
And
ironic given that you were the one that told them the second and third times what was going
yeah,
on.
isn't it though? Doctors really frustrate me. I also have PTSD from cancer. I was diagnosed with PTSD the first time, I think I was about 16, and my mom and I were clashing again. About 16, and my mom and I were clashing again. And my shrink told me part of the reason you're clashing so hard is because you're too close. You know to each other way too intimately, and you both need to back up. And, some of this is post traumatic stress. You guys really need to be mindful of each other because we're diagnosed with PTSD at the same time.
Both of you.
So,
And both
um,
related to what you went through.
yeah,
Do you tell people this story?
not as much as I used to. I tell it sometimes online
Mm.
because something will come up that
I'm wondering, does it change your interaction with the people who you tell it to?
I think that sometimes when I do tell it to people, they're either afraid to get close to me or they put me on a different level and don't get close to me. Not necessarily because they're scared of me, but they've got me up here when really I'm right here in front of you. Those would be the two differences that I see.
Does that make you hesitate to tell your story?
Yes and no. If I think someone could benefit from my story, I will tell them about it. My story, I will tell them about it. Um,
How would you like people to benefit from your story?
Now, my perspective would be when I was doing the bone marrow recruitment stuff, I actually would speak to a lot of nursing classes. And I would always start with my story, tell them why it's important to recruit new marrow donors to the registry. Yeah, so when I'd be speaking to nursing classes, I would say, listen to your patients. The doctor's not always going to. You are going to have a more intimate relationship with your patients, and you need to listen to the things that they are telling you because they know their bodies better than anyone else can. So, if someone comes to you and says, I know I'm not supposed to be relapsing, I know I'm supposed to be cured, listen to them. And if the doctor isn't listening, as a nurse, you have that ability to speak with him or her and really get a better dialogue going on behalf of that patient. That is one way. Another way is listen to your body. Listen to your body. You know yourself better than anyone. If you don't feel like you know your body well, take a minute and do some relaxation breathing and really kind of connect with yourself. Your best survival chance in life is to really know yourself inside and out. You know when you feel well, you know when you don't feel quite right. Listen to yourself and be able to communicate that to the people who can change. If you're not happy in your job, you need to be able to communicate to the people who can help you change it. And that's probably the biggest thing I've learned in my 41 years.
You're so generous. You've really told your story well and with great detail and humor and resilience. And I think the kind of impacts that you're talking about are exactly the kind of impacts that we have when we tell our story. How does that shape you then going forward?
I really think that if I hadn't gotten cancer, at least the first time, I definitely wouldn't be the person that I am today, but I probably would have been in like pageants and just not, you know, just absolutely opposite of what I am now. I'm very down to earth now. I think I've always had an imagination and I've always had a sense of care for humanity. My mom said even when I was a little kid, Like, I cared about other people. I would worry about other people. But now I have this big humanitarian heart. I don't think it would be quite there if I hadn't.
That your mother said to you at a young age, to think about other people. What did you think she meant by that, and how do you think that influenced you?
I think she meant that everyone has hard things to get through, and to say it's not fair about whatever it is you're going through, or it is you're going through, means that you're not recognizing other people's hardships. And, you know, you might think she's prettier than you over here, and you might think that's not fair because you're bald right now, but you don't know what it's like in her home.
Did that give a sense of empathy that you carried forward with you?
Yeah, eventually. At first, I hated it when my mom would say that. It's like, just let me be mad or whatever. Definitely after my third relapse, I started really recognizing that because I was meeting other people at an adult age I remember I had a neighbor shortly after I came off chemo. I guess my hair was longer at this point, and I was probably officially off chemo when I met her. She was looking through a photo album and saw all of my bald pictures, and she started crying. But she had told me, and but she had told me, and she was like, I'm so sorry you went through this. And she was very like, God, she just couldn't comprehend what I had gone through. But she had expressed to me abuse that she had gone through as a kid from her mom's boyfriend. And I can't from her mom's boyfriend. And I can't imagine that. I always tell people, like, this is something I had to go through. And the one thing that I'm grateful for about having childhood cancer is that no one did it to me purposely. There are other hard things that people go through, and people purposely did that to them. No one purposely did that to me.
How are you doing now?
I am cautiously satisfied. I think I always kind of am waiting for something to happen. Not necessarily even cancer, just there's always things that jump up in life. But I'm very satisfied with my career right now. I'm happily single and not even bothering to look. And I have a horde of nieces and nephews. I guess I'm just satisfied to have kind of a normal time right now.
Well, I appreciate you, and I thank you so much opening up about this. Hopefully will be a great deal of help to others. You never know whose lives you're going to impact. I know you already have from all of your good works that you do every day, and your good works that you do every day, and your kind of your legacy over time of service and nonprofit and using the tools that you have and the influence that you have and creating those connections through empathy. It's all really very strong character. I think your mom and dad are right about you. You're very strong. And thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today on Digging Deep, True Stories of Big Change. I'm your host, Kelley Styring, founder and principal researcher from InsightFarm. We help companies make their products better through conversation and connection with consumers, often told as stories like the one you've heard today. If you'd like us to help you participate in this podcast and tell your story, reach out at www.insightfarm.com. We look forward to the conversation.